Hey everyone, welcome to the working group LTS biweekly meeting. This meeting is covered by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so just be mindful of following that. This is being recorded and will eventually be uploaded to YouTube. I think a little bit of manual steps to get that going, so I'll do that last meeting and this meeting when it's ready, and then work with Nigel to get the automated recordings going. That'll be much easier. All right, I've dropped the agenda into the chat. If you want to go ahead and add yourself as an attendee. And if anybody would like to volunteer to take notes today, that would be super great. And we can start off by going through some recurring topics, and we'll first open it up to welcome anybody that's new to the meeting that would like to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Nigel. I work over at Intuit as a developer advocate. We are pretty interested in LTS Kubernetes because, yeah, we have to be careful about upgrades, especially during tax season. Pretty active in State Contracts. Happy to be here to see what's going on.
Hi, I'm Akil and I work at VMware and in the LTS team at VMware. Yeah, like mostly I'm contributing to Containerd and SigNode. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, this is Orko. I work at VMware and I'm actually looking into the LTS part of Kubernetes releases within VMware. And I contribute to test infra mostly and prod. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Next up, I created a project board and I linked it into the front matter at the beginning of the agenda. Doesn't have a whole lot on it yet, but I kind of captured most of what we talked about last week. So I created a Google Doc that we can start to capture questions that we want to answer. It's a suggestion from Nick. So that's linked down here. I also created an experience and friction log that we could just make available for people to add it and drop in stuff. And I think Joe maybe had added something. So thanks for that. So if folks want to take a look at those things, that would be super, super great. We can go through them if we have time at the end, just kind of take a look at them and see if there's any feedback or comments that folks have before we more open them up beyond this group.
One thing I would mention, if you're adding stuff there, throw your name in, just so like we can reach out and follow up and ask questions and clarify things. That'd be helpful.
Well, I'll add that to the doc as instructions too, just to make sure it's clear. All right. Next up, we have Jordan and Han to talk about safer Kubernetes upgrades. Do you guys want to share a screen and like walk through a doc? Would that work? I can give either of you permission to. Jordan has permission. I'll make.
Yeah, Jordan, if you don't mind sharing the screen. You're muted.
Yeah, that's fine.
I can share it too if you want.
I've got it. Just need to find the right tab.
Zoom is weird too because it shows like so much stuff if you accidentally just click the wrong box. You get in a lot of trouble that way.
Yeah, I know.
I get super paranoid about sharing my screen on Zoom.
Yeah, whole desktop, lots of notifications popping up. It's always a good time.
See my box, see how I live.
So I guess I can get started even if it's not showing. So Jordan, me, Joe, we've all been thinking a little bit about sort of the mechanistic aspects of upgrading Kubernetes. And we've been doing so with a lens, obviously, for LTS, right? Like all the presumptions that we have today is that like, and all the policies that we have in place, like, beta APIs being disabled by default and, our feature flag progression things, all of these things presume Kubernetes is going to be upgraded from N to N+1. And even those upgrades can be, and sometimes often are, quite painful for end users or people managing Kubernetes. And so we have this doc, which proposes some upstream changes, which I think would be realistically achievable, which allows for new type of upgrade flow. It's a little bit more granular, and it introduces this idea of a compatibility version. So basically, when you start an N+1, Kubernetes control plane, we would like to start it in a compatibility mode so that it's compatible with N as an intermediate step before actually activating all the APIs and the feature gates and, I guess, cell functions, which are only available in N+1. Some of these things, but this idea, while it applies right now for upgrades from N to N+1, can be extended such that they apply in an LTS upgrade, like a skip level upgrade specifically, right? Because we're not going to have an LTS, at least I don't think we have, because we haven't actually discussed the specific mechanics of what LTS is going to look like yet. But I presume we're going to have one LTS version and not an LTS version per Kubernetes release. That's just extending the Kubernetes support window twice as long. That's not what LTS really is, right? So LTS is supporting one thing past the support window. And so in order to actually do that, we would need to be able to upgrade the LTS version to the lowest supported version in one jump. And so having a compatibility version could theoretically allow us to start, an N+3 or N+2 or whatever Kubernetes version in a compatibility mode that's similar to the LTS version, right? And this gives us an incremental step to be able to upgrade. And it opens a lot of doors to what happens when we encounter bugs, for instance, in upgrades, right? Because what we can do is, let's say we, the flow would look like, upgrade a control plane to N+1, leave it in compatibility mode N. And then if everything is going smoothly, upgrade all the other API servers so that they're all at N, right? Or N+1, but compatibility mode N, ensure everything is stable, and then start toggling on all the features that are part of N+1 or N+3 or whatever. So if we encounter a bug when we enable those features, it now becomes possible for us to just disable those features, wait for a patch release, upgrade to the next patch release, but everything looks exactly the same, right? Because we're in compatibility mode N, right? And so it allows us to actually even skip the bug potentially during an upgrade sequence. We could leave it in the state, wait for upstream to fix that bug, then upgrade, kind of like in a blue-green style, the control plane, leaving it compatibility mode N, and then turn on the feature flags. It enables a lot of kind of cool and interesting flows. The gist of the idea is in this doc, and I wanted to float this idea by the LTS group because it is obviously an LTS concern. And we will need to make a number of policy changes in order for something like this to happen. For instance, we would need feature flags, which are GA, not to be deleted from the code base.
At least for some period of time.
At least for some period of time, yes.
Yeah, so a few things to note about this. We already put some of this information in comments.
Comments, yeah.
By feature flags. So if you go into the feature gates file, there's lots of comments this was alpha in this version and beta in this version and then GA in this version and then a comment saying delete this 2 versions from now. The first step of this is really just taking that comment based metadata and putting it in actual structured data. So it's a very minimal, low risk change. It's really just taking comments and putting them into a struct, so that we can then start running like unit tests or static analysis on it to catch problems where we like had a gap or didn't do something in the right order or in the right number of releases. Like the initial change is very low risk and has immediate just test benefits. It also formalizes some of the things that we've been doing internally in the API server without associating them with a feature gate. So an example is loosening validation. So today we just sort of internally have a validation option and we default it to false in one release and we default it to true in the next release to allow this relaxed validation. And by tying that to something like a compatibility version, it formalizes that. Even if to start, we still only support, n-1 or n+1, it's associated with this formal, like, what version are you being compatible with, instead of sort of scattering true false enablement in various places. So it makes the patterns we're already doing more consistent and systematic. And then, as Han mentioned, it has benefits even for the single version upgrades we're already doing, where today you sort of get the new binary and you get the new behavior by default all at once. And so if there's a problem with the behavior, too bad, like, you enabled that field or you enabled that endpoint by default. Have fun cleaning that up when you like take the new problematic server out and roll back to the previous miner. Like, we persist data to etcd that's interoperable, but you can still like have cleanup to do, depending on what the problem was and whether users started using it while you were in that upgrading state. So it has immediate benefits even for our single version upgrades by giving you a upgrade binary and then enable new version behavior stuff.
There's even non-upgrade benefits. For instance, today, every time you use a feature flag, there's this doc that you have to update with, when you introduce that feature flag, what version that feature flag was introduced. This can now, like, if we do this thing, which is in this proposal, we can auto-generate that and no one will ever have to do that again, which is like kind of a boon for anyone developing anything, right? Because it's always kind of a pain in the butt. So like documentation freeze is going to be lighter, right? Like, people will have to do less. The cycle will be actually more pleasant for developers, which is just a tangential benefit to this proposal.
Yeah, and then this is a clear building block for skip level
Upgrades. Yeah,
it doesn't. I mean, like, there's work to do there.
Of course.
We have to talk to everyone rolling out features and say, like, what would it look like for you to keep this code conditional for another X releases? So there's work to do there, but this gives us a pretty clear roadmap for it. Then it's a matter of deciding, like, can we afford to do that work and getting agreement on the people who would need to adjust how they clean up old stuff once it hits GA, basically.
Yeah, so we've been making the rounds. We went to SIG architecture. No one seemed adverse to the idea. Some people seem to like it. So we're here today, and the plan is to go to cluster lifecycle, since they do a lot of the upgrade flow stuff for kubeadmin and CAPI and stuff, and talk to them next week about this thing, so that we can basically get consensus from the community if we're going to move ahead with this thing, because it's obviously very wide-reaching, and feature flags basically touches everything and almost every seg.
And the outcome of that would be a cap. So yes, this is a verbose version of a goal and motivation and sketch up of design that would make it into a cap. Yeah, Nick.
So it sounds like you're kind of saying that even if you didn't do this, something that was functionally equivalent is like necessary but not sufficient for skip level upgrades.
Yeah, so to do skip
You got to do
level,
something like this.
you have to do something like this.
Yeah.
Han mentioned or referenced a design that Daniel had sort of sketched out that was more ambitious in many ways, but also less clear in many ways. It was sort of this API-based dynamic, which I like some of the goals of, but was really unclear how we would get there and seemed probably years away. Whereas something like this, it's more manual. It's still flag based. Whoever's starting up these things still has to say like what version you're going to be compatible with. But that's pretty tractable and clear actually. Like do a rollout of the new binaries, telling them to be compatible with whatever your oldest version is. Once that's done, then update them and say, okay, be compatible with the version you actually are now. I forgot one other benefit of this. So today, we actually delay some changes by a release in order to be sure that we're compatible one version back. So like allowing data into new fields or loosening validation, like we don't have any way for the operator to tell us, no, it's cool, actually, this is a brand new cluster. You don't have to be one version older compatible. So we artificially delay some fields and features and validation improvements just because we have to assume there might be a server one version back. And so this would actually let the operator accelerate delivery of some things. If you're creating a new 128 cluster, you can tell the components your compatibility version is 128. Just you don't need to artificially delay. So this, I really love this idea. Actually, Han kind of pitched it to me and I was like, oh yeah, this would be great. It lets us speed up delivery by a release in some cases. So that's specifically around like the validation loosening things, probably not so much feature. Like those we actually need to prove out, and there's still a point where it's alpha and we need to prove it out. But like just the validation loosening, it's like, oh, we made a mistake. This would let us deliver it in a single release to new clusters and clusters that completed their upgrade.
And to be fair to Daniel, I loved his proposal. It was extremely ambitious, but that's just Daniel, right? The guy wants to solve world hunger. I personally, I'm just struggling to make dinner. You know what I mean? So this is I like taking tactical steps that are achievable in the short run to get us closer to the goal. Like Daniel's thing was like fixing all the world's problems for Kubernetes, which I still want to do, but I kind of want to do it incrementally.
And I think this information would be necessary no matter what we did, whether it was dynamic or static. Like we need this information, and so starting the codifying the information doesn't seem like it's increasing debt or putting us in the wrong direction. It's just sort of a small step in the right direction.
To be clear, I 100% agree. It seems like a great idea to me, but I wanted to have asked that question just to, so we're all on the same page. Like we've got to do something like this. And, this seems like a pretty good idea to me. Having the data in a structured format as opposed to a unstructured requires human parsing format seems like a win. Anything that we can avoid having requires human parsing seems great to me.
Yeah, Reed.
This sounds a really cool proposal. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the changes in how this impacts the conformance test and how, as a contributor, what additional things we now have to do.
What's so cool about this is we may even be able to enable alpha features for tests. I mean, this isn't address your question directly, but we can actually start testing features that aren't beta. I think if we do it correctly, if we have like an extra flag or something.
Yeah, I don't think we would change the default enablement for alpha features, so I'm not sure it would change much there. I think like what this concretely would look like today when you go to add a feature gate and you put the alpha version in a comment, it would be like part of the structure of the feature gate. So you would record the minor version and the default state. And then as it progressed, you would add entries to that feature gate's
We could have like we have stage promotion or compatibility version, but if your binary version is at 128 and you set your compatibility to 129, that could theoretically mean you're enabling alpha features that project being enabled. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I don't think we can allow future compatibility versions because the current server doesn't know what the next server will include in 129.
No. If you have like
it's a neat discussion, but I think we might need to.
projected.
Let me finish talking about what Rita was asking. So adding the information about the progression of the feature gate so that the information's there. And then when a feature graduates to GA, today we say lock to default and delete all use of the feature gate from the code base. And so we could still lock it to default. There's some discussion in here about like once a feature graduates and a server is running with a compatibility version of that release or higher, we should still be able to count on a feature being on. And so there would probably be some interaction between, like if you're running the server where the feature graduated, but you're staying compatible with an older version, then the gate would be not locked on. But once you've said, I'm running 128 and my compatibility version is 128, we can assume the feature's on. And so things like conformance tests might start to be decorated with the minor version where that feature was on, and we would be able to like run 128 conformance tests against a cluster with compatibility version 128, but then also make sure 127 conformance tests pass against a 128 cluster running in 127 compatibility mode. Like I think we'll probably need information on the conformance test, which again, we have in comments. Like we have this metadata in the test, the conformance test comments saying this was added in whatever version. Probably just need to hoist that into a place where the thing running the test can actually say, this cluster is running at compatibility version 128, so I'm going to run 128 conformance against it and better pass. So adding metadata to the feature gates, keeping the feature gate checks in place for at least some number of releases after GA. Minimum is probably 1. If we want to do skip level stuff more than 1 release, then we'd need to keep those checks in place as many releases as we would want to do skip level stuff. And then decorating tests with the version information, especially around conformance. Yeah, no.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around for the purpose of bringing in new features. It looks like this idea could be approached on a rolling basis with no problem. But for the purpose of deprecating features, it feels like we would have to alter the timeline or necessarily the phase with which we do deprecation, because we have a certain number of releases within which we flag for deprecation versus actual deprecation. I'm just sorry, my thought isn't really fully formed, but I'm.
That's a good observation. So obviously this is still very early stages, so it's possible that we would want to limit the compatibility version to things that are on by default. So things like beta APIs, which we no longer turn on by default, we could decide don't need to be part of this. Or if there's people are saying, nope, that's really important. Even, we can decide, this is new, so we can decide what we're going to do here. But yes, a new server should be able to emulate the configuration and endpoints and field enablement and everything that an older server had. So if that includes continuing to be able to serve a beta API that was on by default, yeah, we would need that to be informed by the compatibility version. Again, I don't think we want to change a lot around what we let people do, like twiddling individual things. Like once a feature is GA in like 128, and you say your compatibility version is 128, I don't think you should be able to turn that feature off. Same thing with like a beta API. If we say this is deprecated, it's not going to be served in 128, once your compatibility version is 128, I don't think you should be able to turn that back on. But we could make narrow exceptions specifically for the compatibility version purposes. But yeah, we would need to revisit that, and it could have implications on like how quickly you can remove gate checks or how quickly you can like, go delete beta serving code or whatever.
We would need to revisit basically all of our policies that assume n to n+1 upgrades. I think, yeah, and those would have to be loosened to support n+3. That includes like, yeah, everything, basically everything.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Was so it sounds like if we were going to use this to enable skip upgrades, then the shortest possible deprecation period is whatever the lifetime that we allow for skip upgrades, right?
Yeah.
Which
+1.
today I think we're actually really close to that for
Deprecated
beta.
beta APIs. Yeah, it's something like 3 releases or 4 releases. Yeah.
I think it's
Is it 2?
3 releases or 1 year. It's really close. We might have an off by 1 error, but we're really close actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, if at some point in the future we were like, wow, we exist in a perfect world where we fixed all our problems and we now allow you to jump like 5 versions because we're allowing you to go 2 years, then 5 versions would be the minimum time that you would need in order to be able to do deprecations. Like, yeah, that's the point that I'm trying to make. And get you to thumbs up. That looks like a thumbs up from Jordan, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, how many versions we support and the SKU we allow and the timeline for removal are all interrelated.
Agreed. Again, I just wanted to call that out so that it was clear for everyone.
JIOT, you want to go next?
Yeah, I could go. So I have thoughts about whether Jordan mentioned whether we want to do it for beta only or GA only APIs, and that's interesting. So I was looking at this thing about immutable secrets, for example, and when we said immutable flags was true or false, that field was added in a GA API. Now, from a functionality perspective, the old server, when we do compatibility mode, it has to understand how does it function with new APIs being added in GA. So does any of our stance around functional behavior changes in GA or beta APIs change as a result of this?
Yeah, so there's we draw a distinction between like beta endpoints and GA endpoints because those are entirely like once the beta endpoint goes away, every client talking to the beta endpoint is entirely broken. So there's no sort of incremental evolution for beta endpoints. That's why beta endpoints are no longer enabled by default. Like it's just too problematic to attract use of them. New fields added to existing types is much more incremental and easy to do in a backwards compatible way. So whenever we add a new field to an existing type, the default behavior if the client omits that field has to stay the same. And so then the only limitation on how quickly we can roll it out is making sure that the oldest server knows about the field so it can preserve the data in it and validate it consistently. And so that's what we wait. We artificially wait a release when we add a new field before we allow anyone to put data in it so that the older server will preserve that data and not lose it and validate it in the same way. So when I was talking about limiting to like not including beta stuff, I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to the endpoints.
But the functionality, when we do compatibility, maybe it is for the time of cap, and I'll refrain from going deeper. It's for my understanding only. Do we have to do any functional compatibility also? Because fields may add it as alpha. I'm talking about particularly about fields because we talk about HD data. Would we have to do any compatibility mode, and would it cause code sprawl to increase for longer, like 4, 5, 6 versions? That's the
not generally. I mean, we already have to do the conditional allowing of data into the field. We're already doing that. basically it would be making sure that's tied to a feature gate or something that's informed by this compatibility version instead of just hard coded internally. And then don't touch that code for a number of releases after it graduates instead of immediately deleting it one release after. I don't think it'd be that burdensome. It's pretty well structured.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So yeah, so this is a sketch. Please ask questions on the doc. That's probably the best place because there's a lot of different groups participating. And like I said, or like Hans said, we'll talk to cluster lifecycle, but then also probably spin up an actual cap.
Because
Say again, I didn't catch that.
I think that was just a off mute when
Oh.
talking to somebody else. Cool. I think that's a really exciting proposal. I'll echo what Rita said. It's pretty cool. I think there's a lot of benefits that can come out of that.
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction of like actually having some mechanism to make LTS like a reality. I think we kind of need to start making steps like right now.
All right, we have a few minutes left. I added two things on the agenda really quickly. One, the experience friction log. I can share my screen too. Let me kind of look at it real quick. I was gonna suggest that we share it more broadly if folks are comfortable with that. Definitely open to not doing that if we don't want to do it, but essentially I gathered the great information that Jordan put into the meeting notes from last week into here, just so folks had like a central place to see kind of the changes that had happened, and they could kind of look at those and see if they had been beneficial to them or not, and then capture just experiences folks have with upgrades today, and maybe if those things help them or if there are still areas that are gaps for them. I thought it would be a good way to kind of just gather anecdotal information, real user experiences that maybe we don't all see as folks that aren't running things in places that are hard to do some upgrades. So take a look at this doc, leave some comments. I made it editable by everybody in the WGLTS distro list, so we can make changes and then share it more broadly if you want. And then the second one, last week, Nick suggested that we make a doc to just kind of hash
Jeremy,
out.
this is really small.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you could possibly zoom in a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I don't know why it was so small. I made the other windows bigger, but like when it was open, it was super tiny. So this is empty right now, but I think a good like homework assignment for everybody would maybe be to capture some things that we're interested in learning in surveys, and we can review those things at the next meeting and kind of hammer out which direction we want to go and kind of probing end users about areas that we want to ask more questions about. And that was all for those two topics, just kind of basic right now.
For this survey topic, do you have a timeline in mind?
Yeah, I think we should maybe work on it over the next 2 weeks, and then we can review it in the meeting in 2 weeks. Whittle things down from there, if that works for everybody.
Scott, do we know who added case 2? I guess I can look in the edit log. Never mind. I put Scott's name beside case 2 in the friction log, and he said that wasn't him.
Yeah, I had started a suggestion. It looked like someone just continued with something new on my suggestion. So it may actually not be visible in the history.
That's all right.
I think it was Joe. I'm looking at the chat or in the Slack channel. He said, I updated the friction log with a case for a skip version upgrade considering in regulated industries. So I think that was Joe who's on this meeting.
Scott, I'm curious. I saw you mentioned specifically 121 to 122. I'm curious if you've seen improvements in newer versions. So with fewer deprecations and action required changes.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify.
Okay.
I mean, that certainly 122 was a big API removal release, and took us a while to get our customers over that release.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to go over? Otherwise, we can end a few minutes and let Nick go to bed and let everybody else have some free time.
Just one more question about the upgrade experience friction log is, are we hoping that we'll be able to come to some conclusions by the next meeting? Like, are we time boxing, you know, when we're looking for people to put their entries in there? Or is
That's
that
a good
one more
question.
long-term?
I think that
I'm
was
just
probably
wondering what action we want to take. Yeah.
Yeah, I think immediate action, let's review that and see if there's anything we want to add to it. And then we can agree to share it more broadly, because I haven't posted it anywhere other than in the WGLTS Slack channel. So I think making sure that it lines up with the general shape of things we want to just let people share with us. If there's any specific information we want to add to that, like Jordan pointed out, name would be useful. So maybe we can review that this week, and then we can share it more broadly and decide on a time box for that. I don't think 2 weeks is enough, because it's going to be hard to get it out and share with people.
And I'd be happy to like have people add more details
as we
in
go.
the future. One thing that I am trying to do is like understand root causes for some of these things, and so like breaking down like a particular experience to like, were there particular releases? What were the things in that release that caused problems? Have we made changes to try to address those things? And do we have any signal on newer releases, whether those changes were effective? The things that I'm most interested in like looking to make changes around are either problems people hit that we hadn't considered and haven't actually made any improvements on, or where the changes we made, they're like, yeah, we got up to that version where you said it was all going to get better, and we still hit problems. Like those two signals, are there things we haven't addressed yet, or things that we thought we addressed that people have actually gotten to the versions where we addressed them and still hit issues? Those are ones I really want to know about.
Do you think those are things?
Some analysis, and like that's why I want names, so I can like follow up and understand where they're at. And
so if you could add anything into the like the front section, how the stock works, about specifics that you want to have answered there, that would be super useful. I think a useful thing would be to do analysis and maybe invite people to come and share, and we can ask them questions. So maybe that's another thing to include. You know, can you come to the meeting and share with us, or we can reach out and do that.
I'm probably gonna add some stuff in about having people do Kubernetes upgrades when you're giving them a set of CRDs that may or may not have sort of rely on stuff that happens in particular Kubernetes versions. So new cell validations in Gateway API is a good example there.
Yeah, and that's actually part of my worry about smearing the sort of supported, active, recommended Kubernetes versions across many more additional miners. Like it means that someone who is developing something that needs to work against any active supported Kubernetes version now basically can't rely on anything for however many releases we support. So today it's bounded to a year-ish, year plus a few months. So if, cell was on by default, and I don't remember, 127 for CRD, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
DA is expected to graduate in 129. So like around the time 127 is the oldest supported release, in open source and in like major hosted providers, managed providers, you can pretty much depend on at least the first iteration of cell validation being available.
Yeah.
If we kept a version around for 2 years, it's like, oh, well, now can no one confidently use that for 2 years? Like, and so there's this tension. It's not free to like keep versions around longer. So yeah, that's the tension. Like, if people are keeping versions longer because upgrades are hard or problematic or unreliable, can we address those issues but still let people like rely on relatively recent, like in the last year types of
So
things?
yeah, if you're developing something that relies on people like being prepared to ride the bleeding edge, then you pushing the bleeding edge out means that you got to wait. And speaking as someone who's currently doing that, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But not to say that we shouldn't do things. Just that is the trade-off that we all need to make.
Yeah, for everything where we said, oh, it's too late, it'll take too long to roll out. Like we said that 3 or 4 years ago about things. If we had just like started putting the building blocks in place, we would have them by now. So
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the best time was 3 or 4 years ago. The second best time is tomorrow.
All right. Everybody has a great rest of your day, evening. Have a good day tomorrow. Bye, everybody.